Hello everybody, I want to thank you so much for tuning in today. This is going to be a little bit of a disclaimer before I start this. This video will feature trigger type of topics. It talks about depression and abuse, especially emotional abuse in the case of the Apriltello ship. And I just want to pre-warn people before they go into this. This is a bit of a rant and a theory that a lot of people share. I wanted to be one of the first people to talk about it, as I recently went head to head with someone who very much had different beliefs on the subject than I did. As a disclaimer, I do not hate April. I actually used to ship Apriltello incredibly hard. However, as the series went on and April's actions slowly became more distant and Donnie became more obsessive, I noticed that their relationship was incredibly unhealthy and possibly abusive. I don't hate April, but over time I have begun to slowly dislike her because of the way she has started to act, especially around the turtles and Karai. So now that you're going into this, just remember the following information you are about to see is my opinion. Don't get your panties in a twist, and I'm going to apologize for my horrendous voice right now. It is so weird. I have the worst cold ever. But I want to thank you all for being here and sit back and enjoy the video. Hello YouTubians and Tumblers, this is Hamato Yangniko Mao Yin reporting in for a 3-part video series that I will be doing on Apriltello. Is it a emotionally abusive relationship? Now, the only reason this came up is a user on Tumblr, April the Kinoich. She runs an Ask blog. I actually followed her. And one of her askers agree. I don't like Donnie at all. However, in between each of these words, there was a picture of April either hugging or showing other signs of affection towards Donnie. This got me a little bit upset, especially when they reblogged their own post saying she must love him. And so I responded to this post because I felt that not only was this post a bad representation of Apriltello as a whole, but it showed the aspects of the abusive relationship that many people theorize they have. So I reblogged it and added my own bit. I hate this ship. This is an emotionally abusive relationship. He deserves so much better. Apriltello, 2012 edition, of course, was a emotionally abusive relationship. So, mess up during this argument is there are 3 main types of abuse, and they commonly refer to verbal and physical abuse when I am not directing totally towards those. In fact, the abuse that I state directly is emotional abuse or psychological abuse. So in this first video, I will be reading different definitions of each type of abuse and explaining exactly what they are. Starting with verbal abuse. Verbal abuse is described as a negative defining statement told to the victim or about the victim by withholding any response, thereby defining the target as non-existent. If the abuser does not immediately apologize and retract the defining statement, the relationship may be a verbally abusive one. And this is the first paragraph in a Wikipedia article on verbal abuse. And another thing I will be pointing out is different aspects of each type of abuse. And here we go. Verbal abuse includes the following: abusive anger, accusing and blaming, blocking and diverting, chronic forgetting, countering, damnation, denial of anger or abuse, judging and criticizing, minimalization, discounting, trivializing, name-calling, ordering, undermining, threatening, withholding, and also age discrimination that can be considered a form of verbal abuse. So, verbal abuse has a very wide range of forms of abuse. And this was where April the Kinoich was getting very confused in our argument. So, now another form of abuse she references to is, in fact, physical abuse. And here's the definition on this. Physical abuse can be defined as an intentional act of causing injury or trauma to another person by way of bodily contact. In most cases, children are the victims, but also adults can be victims in cases of domestic or workplace aggression. And in the forms of physical abuse, you see, physical abuse is a much narrower field. It requires some form of physical contact. Physical abuse means any non-accidental act or behavior causing injury, trauma, or other physical suffering or bodily harm. Abusive acts towards children can result from a parent's attempts at child discipline through excessive corporal punishment. And this is one of the interesting things in their relationship. Donnie and April do not show signs of physical abuse. In fact, they are constantly very much on the same plane in the show when it comes to their standings on things. However, the relationship is still incredibly unhealthy. And so now we get to our final topic, psychological abuse, or emotional abuse. It is a form of abuse characterized by a person subjecting or exposing another person to behavior that may result in psychological trauma, including anxiety, chronic depression, or post-traumatic stress disorder. And in terms of emotional abuse, the problems with emotional abuse just so happen to be clearly outlined. In fact, one of the most interesting things about psychological or emotional abuse is it is not often recognized as abuse. In fact, it does not have a set in stone definition. And one of the interesting things is side effects to different forms of emotional or psychological abuse are psychological strain, health impairment, loss of motivation, decreased work or school performance as a result of stressful conditions, increased absenteeism in fear of harassment repetition, having to drop courses, change academic plans, or leave school, in fear of harassment repetition, being objectified and humiliated by scrutiny and gossip, loss of trust in environments similar, loss of trust in people that are similar or occupy similar positions, and effects on relationships, weakening of support network or being ostracized from professional or academic circles, depression, anxiety, or panic attacks, sleeplessness and or nightmares, difficulty concentrating, headaches, fatigue, also including eating orders, alcoholism, and the feelings of powerlessness or out of control. Now, this is where a lot of people confuse psychological and verbal abuse. Psychological abuse does not have to use words. A form of psychological abuse is ignoring someone who needs your attention. In fact, when you have neglected children, that is exactly what is happening. They have not been verbally abused. They have not been physically abused. They have done the exact opposite. There has been no physical contact. There hasn't been nothing verbal. They are psychologically damaged. What I found incredibly interesting in her argument is one of the things she does throughout the argument is she talks in the first person of April O'Neil, quoting something she said. "No, this is not an emotionally abusive relationship at all. In no way, shape, or form did Donnie or I threaten to harm or leave the other or force the other to do horrible or humiliating things that would leave an emotional scar like anxiety or depression. This is what emotionally abusive means. Please do not confuse emotionally abuse for rejection or refusal. That is not emotional abuse." And this is where they got their definition wrong. You do not need to be scarred for something to be abuse. In fact, if someone was to push you out of malice and you were uninjured, but you were still pushed, it would still be considered physical abuse. The same thing with verbal abuse. Verbal abuse can suck like crap, but you are not guaranteed to contract anxiety disorders from it. In fact, psychological abuse is one of the most horrible types of abuse. It is incredibly damaging, can cause, in fact, many different mental instabilities. And throughout the show, we see many instances of Donnie being increasingly unstable. And the strange thing is throughout the show, he has a lot of pressure being put on him. And a lot of that pressure is for April. And quoted on the Wikipedia page of April's profile for the 2012 series, Donnie constantly risks his life to save her and or flirt with her. In fact, that in itself is a physically abusive or psychological relationship. Because if you are putting your body and mind in danger of something for someone else when they do not need it, that and them not stopping you is, in a way, abuse. So in this, I responded with, "I am afraid I have to say no to this. Donnie is incredibly sweet and caring and would do anything for April. On the other hand, in the series, April often treats him rudely, snaps on him, or even ends up using his affection for her to get what she wants. She never tells him that she doesn't like him. In that way, and instead, whenever he goes to pull away from the relationship, she does something to make him think that the interest is mutual. In this relationship, he gives her everything she wants, but she gives him little to nothing in return. She has already shown throughout the series more interest in Casey than Donnie, and Casey was introduced much later. She allows Donnie and Casey to fight over her, causing them injury, and she never seems to try and let both of them know if she has interest. Frankly, I believe Donnie will soon get screwed over for his love for her when the crystal starts taking effects, as seen in the newest episode of the show, in which Shinigami is introduced. In the fight, a crystal from a previous episode from the space arc is around April's neck, and these crystals had the ability to corrupt godly-like beings, and the fact that April uses one against Donnie's will has been showing to start taking some side effects on her. In fact, in her battle with Shinigami, she got so mad that she went into a sort of meta mode where she could have injured or killed Shinigami out of cold blood. And I have a feeling Donnie, being closely related to this event, is going to end up getting hurt because he cares so much about her. So here is more of my post. Frankly, she is only there for him when it is easy for her, but it still expects him to be there for her 24/7. And that, my friend, is an emotionally abusive relationship if I have ever seen one. Because in an emotionally abusive relationship, you do not have equal terms with each other. In an emotionally abusive relationship, one person is manipulative, or both people. It can go either way. Donnie, throughout the entire series, has not once been manipulative. However, April, because she knows how much Donnie cares for her, will constantly ask him to do small tasks that he knows his brothers might not approve of, but he feels obliged to do them because it's April, and she hasn't let him know that his attempts to fall in love with her, his attempts to go after her, are incredibly unsuccessful. This is where I like to bring in Shinigami. Shinigami, a new character. We see that she does physically abuse Mikey from the very beginning. However, she is not in a relationship with him. She says it from the beginning. In fact, it is almost definite that Shinigami may have a relationship with Karai, making that the first gay relationship in the show thus far. And one of the incredible things about this relationship is whenever Mikey does flirt with Shinigami, in the first episode that she is revealed in, she turns down his responses and shows that she is uninterested. April often just ignores it or acts flattered, thus leading Donnie into a false sense that he has a chance. Okay, now we get back to April, the Kinoichi. Okay, hun, you want to know what emotional abuse is? Please take a look into the Harley Quinn and Joker relationship from the Batman series. This should help explain it a lot better. This, to me, was very upsetting that she actually used Harley Quinn and Joker relationship because it's almost ironic. Harley Quinn and the Joker are so much worse than any relationship I have seen to date on modern television. They have extreme verbal abuse. They have extreme psychological and emotional abuse and extreme physical abuse. And the fact that I am only referring to emotional abuse in this, because emotional abuse is in effect manipulating someone or changing their feelings. And so here was what I responded. Actually, you see a lot of parallels in the two relationships. The biggest difference is that Harley and the Joker's relationship is physically abusive. In fact, you have the same scenario in which one character is only kind or loving when it is easy, and they also just happen to use the shell of a relationship that the other person thinks they have to manipulate the other person into doing what they want. The key difference: the Joker admits to having no feelings for Harley and tells her that she is not worth his time. Harley knows this but convinces herself otherwise, a case of Stockholm Syndrome. Apriltello is a manipulative relationship because April does not confirm anything and still uses Donnie. I was involved in a relationship like this once, and I know its inner aspects. So please do your research and maybe actually take a course in psychology, something I have done. And this is actually true. I took a course in psychology earlier this year, and I loved that course because it helped me so much on getting to know people better in an emotional level. And so during this, I realized that chances were, as this argument went on, it was only going to get more and more ridiculous. Because in reality, April the Kinoichi was avoiding my points. She did not try and find a relationship in which emotional abuse was the only aspect. She compared this relationship to the Joker and Harley Quinn, by far one of the most abusive relationships of all of cartoon history. And that to me is incredibly hilarious because it shows the lack of knowledge that this person has. And if you remember in my post, I said I started it with I hate. Hate is a personal opinion. So the fact that she decided to argue with me over my feelings shows another bit of lack of immaturity. So here was her response. Now remember, she is still playing as April. And I figured this out when she said this. At first, I thought she might have been arguing with me in the first person by the second post, but I was horribly wrong. In this post, she says, "My father is a psychologist, so I know my stuff. But please, I'd like you to give examples in which I have used and or manipulated Donnie that would leave him emotionally scarred. I am interested in what you see that is considered abusive." Now, one of my favorite things about this is she actually puts an image of April in it that looks incredibly nervous and unsure, which honestly makes me kind of feel that's exactly how she was feeling at this point in the argument. And the fact that she added, "My father is a psychologist," really disturbs me because she is not, at this point, she is not actually viewing the character as a make-believe character. She is viewing herself as this character. If you have watched the show, which I have watched the whole show, and I constantly rewatch it, you will know that April's father is a famous psychologist. And I guarantee you that whoever made this blog, their parent is not a psychologist. If they were, they'd be able to make proper arguments against mine. So now things were really starting to get actually racking for me. So I posted, "Sorry to in fact burst your bubble, but not all abuse comes with scarring. Here are some examples in their relationship, which are very unhealthy, manipulative, and or abusive, along with quotes from other fans of the show." In fact, I went on the Wikipedia page because I was curious how many people shared my beliefs about the Apriltello ship, and I was surprised to find many people. "He keeps risking his life to save and compliment her. She clearly likes Casey. Why string Donnie along like that? He has no chance. She cares about him, but only as a friend. Donatello was showing hints to be suffering limerence, other than just a simple teenage crush. At this point, I don't care who she ends up with. I just want her to decide already. She's really being a jerk by leading them both on." I also linked a thread to the Turtlepedia wiki in this post. And I'm going to go to the page right now and read off some more of these comments because I didn't want to make my response too long. It's kind of funny. "Why the hell did she kiss Donnie at the end of A Foot Too Big? This is so frustrating. She clearly likes Casey. Why string Donnie along like that? I didn't like this new episode because it was not only a lame episode, but now people will be shipping Donnie and April again. But he has no chance." And then another person responded to this comment, "Yes, I was so angry. April is such a manipulative jerk." And another person posted, "I've talked about this before on an older thread, and I think April is a lot more complicated than this because she can sense other people's minds to some degree, because Casey and Donnie's feelings have never been much of a mystery to her. Maybe she can sense their baggage as much as their virtues, and they both regularly endear and irritate her. And it may have been why Irma was her best friend for a whole year. Either April couldn't sense her, or April could only sense what Prime wanted her to sense." And in fact, as you look through these comments, I will leave a link in the description. It's very sad because Donatello has gotten to the point where he has an obsessive crush. She is not answering him, so he continues to seek and seek and seek. When people continue to seek things for very long amounts of times, it leads to obsession and mental illness. Here is a response to another comment. "And because of his obsessive crush on April, a lot of people hate the 2012 Donatello." And it's true. It makes him less likable because he becomes so infatuated with her that he just ends up becoming more of a character type instead of an actual character. And it's kind of sad that you see this because Donatello and April is a very bad couple. They both have very different views upon each other. They both are not ready for a relationship yet. This is one of the biggest problems I have with this. In fact, here I have a few more parts of my post. Here are a few lines about emotional abuse. There is no established definition for emotional abuse. Emotional abuse can possess a definition beyond verbal and psychological abuse because it ranges so far. But emotional abuse consists of the manipulation of the victim's feelings, as seen in April's way of never telling him that she is or isn't interested, and leading him on with no intention of ever being in a relationship. In fact, this is a very common thing that happens nowadays. People have committed suicide over these things, where people will fake a relationship to get what they want. Next off, men who were emotionally abused by their female partners exhibited higher rates of chronic depression than the general population. Johnny constantly stresses over April's thoughts on him and is shown to suffer depression to an extent. And this is very sad because we see it so much in the show. Johnny started out being this quirky kid, and at this point in the show, he has lost a lot of his innocence. He has, in fact, been very, very upset and depressed lately, and he's slowly becoming less and less of the happy-go-lucky nerd we all love, and more of a depressed introvert. Another quote I linked can cause sleeplessness and or nightmares, difficulty concentrating, headaches, and fatigues. He has nightmares about April, and this fear controls him. This fear is seen in people with BPD and those who suffer from emotional abuse. Fear is not losing her, but her turning on him. It says a lot about their relationship. This is another thing. People who have a relationship that they care deeply about, their nightmares are not going to often be them being attacked or tried to be killed by the person they love, but most of the time it is going to be the person they love dying and them unable to save them. Apriltello is completely different in this regard. Another quote, their study found that abuse committed by women, including emotional and psychological abuse, such as controlling or humiliating behavior, was typically viewed as less serious or detrimental than identical abuse committed by men. And this is what I said in the post. The sad truth is if the gender roles were reversed, we would not be having this conversation. In fact, if you had, in many shows, two girls crushing on a single guy, it's shown to be a very bad relationship and often puts them into depression and often hurts the characters. Like if you think of Sakura and her best friend, um, they both had a crush on Sasuke. And in the show, they ended up sacrificing so much for him when in the end only one of them could end up with him, and he even committed abuse towards them sometimes. Something quite awful, and fans called it out like crazy because he was male. However, because this situation is April, a girl, taking advantage of Donnie, a man, it makes it okay because of the system we live in. Nowadays, they have done studies that show that if you put a dog, a cat, a small girl, and a small boy in a park alone, that the first person to be rescued is the girl, ranging from only 3 to 10 seconds. The cat, around 2 minutes, the dog, around 5, and the little boy, they ended up cutting off the experiment because he was left for 45 minutes there. They even had him saying things like, help me, and begging. And this is disturbing because it just shows you how much of an extent people view men as lesser victims, even boys. And that's the saddest thing about this discussion. And in one of my favorite things I said in the entire argument comes next. Because at this point I was getting very angry that they were not speaking to me as if I was an actual person. They were still holding up this April the Kinoichi persona. And if they really believe that, they have problems. To be honest, you can play as your characters, but if you want to commit into a serious debate, you do not play as those characters. So what I flat up said is, speaking as the character in a serious argument is unprofessional and shows you have bias. To this is when they really started to get clear you do not understand the concept, and regardless, if I do make my points loud and clear, it wouldn't make a difference. In any case, many of these points are invalid, and for a good reason, but I will save my time. But no, I am not biased. As if I am, you are too, for backing Donatello's actions, for constantly pushing for a relationship and stating that his actions should be accepted by April when April clearly isn't ready. And you may want to reread many of these comments you have sent, for many do not defend the statement that is in bold. Also, you might want to review what has happened with Donnie and April since they met. It is clear that this is just a ruse to define your means of hating April, because Donnie is in love with her and not you. And they proceeded to send a picture of the 2012 turtle's butt pointed at the viewer, and ended it with a "so good night." And the funniest thing is they also reblogged in this. It stinks when you have to switch to third person to make a point and it still doesn't sink in, admitting the entire argument they had been sitting there doing a stinking person, a first person view of April. In fact, it disturbed me. I was so surprised by this. And the funniest thing about this is, I will not name the user, because if you want to find them, you can try on their own. I am not telling you to go and send these people hate mail. I'm not telling you to form a bias against them. I'm just stating facts of an argument. In fact, a second party went on to reassure them. I know the feeling. When that happened, forget them. April, if they can't understand your lesson and what you are saying, it's better they don't learn at all. Coming from a person who has been in an abusive relationship before, Apriltello is far from being in an abusive relationship. In fact, they go on to list several abusive relationships they've had. But surprisingly, none of them have any relevance to Donatello or April. In fact, they are all incredibly far. Most feature sexual and physical harassment, and these are not good points. I had already stated that I had gone through an emotional relationship like this, and the fact that they tried to do this again actually made me end up laughing. I have to say that I was surprised by the extent of what people were willing to do to actually defend a make-believe character that clearly was not only not them, but also not only are they defending a fake character, but in this argument, they are not making good points. They are not being professional, and they are disregarding facts that are proven given through evidence from accurate sources. In fact, I'm looking through my blog right now to find my final response post because she ended up blocking me from her account because of my final response post. And it's quite ironic because in this response post, to be honest, I kind of just gave the truth to her. The problem is with this relationship, there's so much wrong with it. This is not a healthy relationship. It's not a good relationship. And it is especially not a relationship people should support. In fact, it's the opposite. And so I'm afraid to say this, but I can't let my side of the argument not be heard. In fact, because they blocked me, it actually erased all of my responses except for the ones that they reposted, which kind of makes it ironic that they would even block me because they're not letting people see all the elements of the story. And finally, posted by the same person who defended them, someone asked, "Whoa, okay, I admit that I don't ship Apriltello, like I used to, but going as far to call it emotionally abusive? She and Donnie have things that I don't agree with, but calling their relationship abusive is overstepping it." And this person goes on to defend, exactly. We all still need to remember that April is a teenager. She had no mother. She goes on to list all the ways that April and Donnie are both not ready for a relationship. Something I state in my argument. In fact, that's what makes this relationship so toxic. Not only are both characters being abused in one way or another, April in a way because she's constantly having to deal with advances by Donatello, but she doesn't stop it, and in turn also emotionally or occasionally physically abuses Donatello. And out of all of the turtles in the 2012 series, Donatello is the sweetest and kindest, most understanding character. And frankly, that's my favorite thing about him. Now, I'm sorry for taking up a huge amount of time with this rant, but I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Apriltello is a good ship? Do you think it's abusive? Or do you think it's as toxic as I have pointed out in this video? I want to thank you so much for sticking along with me this long because I have the world's worst cold and I sound completely awful and weird right now. So I'm going to thank you all and leave you with this question in your heads. I hope to do another video soon. Thank you very much.